All right. Seems like we are live. Welcome everybody to the Tales from the Road podcast. This is Pierce. This is my channel, Tales from the Road, and this is podcast number 5. I'm calling this podcast the first time in the stands, and this podcast will cover basically what it's like to visit Central Asia, what it's like to travel in these various countries, in the former Russian sphere, in the very Turkic sphere that is the stands, what kind of impressions you're going to have, what it's going to be like when you get out there, and everything in between. We're going to really look at, what it means to travel to those places and kind of the ins and outs of all that good stuff. So as a little background, I traveled in Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan this summer. I was planning to basically see all the stands. For those of you that don't know, the stands are basically this kind of weird multi-ethnic area that lies between China to the east, Russia to the north, and then to the south, like Iran and Pakistan. So I'm calling the stands, there's like 4 major stands that you got to know. You have Turkmenistan, the North Korea of basically that region. It's one of the most locked down countries that you can pretty much see in the entire world. It's shocking. The only way you can get into Turkmenistan is to essentially get a tourist, maybe even not a tourist visa, a journalism visa, and you can basically kind of say that you're a journalist. You can pay something like $200 per day. They let you in there, and it's really quite the situation and scenario. So Turkmenistan. Then you have Uzbekistan just to the north. It's a very interesting country. I went there. And I'll explain a lot more about it later. Let's just keep it rolling. We have Kazakhstan, mostly made famous by the movie Borat. Most people don't know anything about Kazakhstan, to be honest. And it's one of the countries that I am so super disappointed that I wasn't able to visit. They suspended their tourist visa regime until the end of the year. So as a tourist, I could not go, even though I was very, very close. And it will be the number 1 spot I will go to 100% when I return to the region. Next up, you got Kyrgyzstan or however you want to say it. The maybe most challenging to spell of all the regions, and probably the least known, to be honest. It's a very wild, very untamed landscape with a lot of people living nomadically. And we'll get into that later as well. The last one kind of in this group of central stand countries is Tajikistan, home of the Tajiks. It's also a very complex country, which I'll get into a little bit. I also couldn't go this summer because their visa regime also wasn't open, but it's someplace that I'm very interested in after going to the very Tajik-centric cities of Samarkand and Bukhara in Uzbekistan. So those are on the list. The other stands that people often get confused with this kind of area that really doesn't have anything to do with these areas, kind of, because they border them, but they're a lot more in flux and a lot more controversial, are Pakistan and Afghanistan. So these 2 countries, I think, kind of they come with a lot of baggage, and they really change the way that people think about the Stan region. So when you tell people, hey, I'm going to Kyrgyzstan, they hear the word Stan, they have the idea that Afghanistan is close to there, or Pakistan, and we hear about a lot of the violence, the tribal violence, and the terrorism, and all the negative things that you get associated with these countries. It's not true 100%. I mean, I would certainly visit any one of those countries, and I'm sure 99% of the population is fantastic. It's just they get a bad name in the news, and because of the American military presence there, they get a lot of negative vibes. So I think a lot of people get very kind of confused with the Central Asian region, and they think that they're all similar, that they all have their own challenges, and that they're all kind of a place that are dangerous and politically volatile. And I think that's just incoherent and incorrect. These are huge regions over large swaths of land with very different histories. Some were part of some empires, some were part of others, and just because they have Stan in the name doesn't necessarily mean that they're similar at all. saying that the culture of Pakistan is very similar to the culture of Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan. I think that would be comparing the culture of the United States to the culture of Brazil. There are definitely some overlaps, but languages are different, cultures are different, practices are different. It's really a big mix, and I think it would be really silly and unwise to say that Pakistan and Kazakhstan are similar just because they have the word "stan" in their name. So to go into the history of this region a little bit, for those of you that are interested, welcome to the podcast. If you guys have questions, I would love to see them in the chat. This is kind of an open dialogue, so if you're interested in anything Stan related or travel related or Tales from the Road related, hit me up in the chat. So a little bit into the history of the Stans. So this is a really interesting region because you have the Mongolian influence originally. You have to imagine that this is kind of the Central Asian steppe. There's a lot of flat land and a lot of mountains. And I believe you didn't have a chance to travel to Turkmenistan. Not yet. I said it earlier. It's on the list. It's like the North Korea of the area, and I would love to see it. I actually have a colleague from work a couple of years back who actually got invited to do business training in Turkmenistan because I'm actually from the city Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is a sister city of Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. So they brought some innovative entrepreneurs to Albuquerque, and we in turn sent my boss along with some other people in the Department of Economic Development over to the old Turkmenistan. So I would love to go. Apparently, they have the largest kind of like Russian natural disaster besides Chernobyl, which is a genuinely interesting thing. So continuing on. So the history of this region, very, very interesting, very diverse, and it all kind of goes back to this nomadic ancient steppe people. So you have to imagine Turks, the idea of Turks. All right. Please don't go to Turkmenistan with North Korean mentality. Okay. I won't do that. I promise you. Thank you for the haircut. Oh, thanks, Beza. So anyway, so it's all about the Turks. The cool thing is if you travel to Turkey, which is a pretty common country that a lot of people go to, you might see some strange similarities to what you find in, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan. And the reason for this is because there is a nation of people called the Turks that predate any Turks that you're going to find in Turkey. These are Central Asian people with features that look very similar to what you would consider Chinese-looking people, although it's mixed over a long period of time. The Turkic nations are massive. You can find them in Russia, and they go all the way up to northern Siberia. They go through the stands, they go through Azerbaijan and Turkey. And there's cool similarities, which you can find have been transferred from the nomadic horse culture that basically rode west and west and west and west until they formed the kind of the Ottoman Sultanate, Ottoman Empire, and really expanded as far west as as Vienna, Austria, which is really incredible. And you can find these traces of Turkic culture pretty much all over the central part of the world. And this is really a weird thing because when you go to Kyrgyzstan, for example, these are like the OG people, the original gangster people. They're the guys that got on the horses and rode all the way over there. And the people that didn't are from that kind of traditional, normal culture, the original one that kind of formed all of this. So as you go to these places, it's like, especially if you spend time in Turkey, I've spent a lot of time in Turkey and I, love the Turkish people. It's just weird because you're like, it's a culture, but it's also like a culture that is new and in a different sense. The best way I can describe it is being from the United States and living, because I'm from New Mexico, you have this kind of Mexican culture, traveling to Mexico, and then going to Spain. There's a lot of similarities that you see, obviously, that the Spanish left, but you're getting the newfangled kind of creation of that state, as opposed to the source culture that kind of informed all of it. So I think that's probably the best example I can give, and that's what you're going to get. So to be fair, Central Asia is a very, very diverse, very interesting, and very unique region on many different levels. And most of it's cultural, but also some of it is the history that happened after the nomadic peoples got conquered. So long story short, there were various Turkic empires that occupied the Central Asian steppe. There's the original one, which is called the Göktürk Empire, or Sultanate, or whatever you'd like to call it, which was kind of, there was basically warring tribes. And you got to imagine like small groups of nomadic people who live in yurts or tents outside, you know, kind of really in this very vast, very desolate, very isolated area. These people would come together, they would fight each other, they would war with each other, they would conquer each other, and that wasn't really necessarily good for anybody. So in like, I believe it's the 900s, the Göktürk Empire kind of came out of this dueling tribalism that was kind of embodying the area for a long period of time. So they unified, and then they slowly unified and unified and unified. And as the Mongols swept in, they expanded, they kind of expanded their dominance and regime. The other cool part about this region is it's highly diverse. So historically, it sits along the old Silk Road. So that's the road that connected China to the west, kind of like a super highway for goods. And basically the Silk Road, the crossroads were in Central Asia. So not only do you get this Turkic influence, which obviously expanded all over the world, but you also have the world which came to Central Asia. So you get influence from China, whether it's in the food or whether it's in the silk and the clothing. You get influence from the Middle East, whether it's in the religion or the textiles. You get the influence from the Roman Empire, most likely, and the other empires of Europe, bringing spices and bringing whatever they have. And then to the south is India. And so you get kind of like lots of interesting kind of melanges and mixes. And that's what makes the region so like confusing, because you see a lot of things you know in contexts that you're unsure of, and then you see a lot of things you wouldn't expect to see necessarily. Like you wouldn't expect to see noodles in a country that was controlled by Asia. I mean, not controlled by Asia, I'm sorry, controlled by Russia. So it's just like a weird mix, and that's what makes the region so cool and like so fulfilling. So you have this Silk Road culture. People are walking across the steppe, walking across the plains. And you've got like Chinese mixing, you've got Muslims mixing, you've got all these different, you know, you have non-Muslim kind of spiritual people living with their traditional religion, and you've got Christians, and you get all these like really interesting, weird mix of people all in one place. And so you have the Mongols kind of like, the Mongols take it over, and you have years of khanates where these horse lords control big swaths of land and people. But the cool part about the khanates was that they weren't necessarily super dominant with regards to culture. They were more like, we've conquered you, you're going to pay tribute to us, and that's about kind of where our tie ends. So the cultures in all the different stand cultures were able to flourish and to be able to be themselves without being completely culturally dominated by the Mongolian Empire. So out of that, you get a bunch of different khanates, because the Mongols good at conquering, but they were not very good at ruling the places they conquered. And so the khanate, a khan is like a king, kind of, a lord. If you guys ever seen the show Marco Polo on Netflix, that's a great show, and I would certainly recommend it. I'm not sure how accurate it is, but it kind of does tie together this idea of the Silk Road and the exchanges that happened. But basically what I'm saying is that there are these khanates, these kind of, you know, large, we can call them districts or areas that were managed by various warlords, horse warlords, whatever, you know, the guys, whatever you imagine a Central Asian person looking like, you know, like your traditional Mongol with the hat, with the kind of long mustache. That's kind of what I'm imagining. But in the 1500s, 1600s, what happened during these khanates is the Islamic revolution and renaissance of art, of history, of writing, of culture, while the Europe was more or less in the Dark Ages. So a lot of these places, especially what you find in Uzbekistan, you find this really delightful tapestry of ancient writings and histories and peoples that made their impression on astronomy, on sciences, on physics, on mathematics. And they were really consequential places and places of learning and trade for, you know, literally 1,000 years. And this kind of tradition still goes on today. And when I discuss a little bit more about Uzbekistan, you'll hear more about that for sure. Here's the first question. As an American, what was the first cultural shock you ever experienced in the stands or Central Asia overall? And how did you tackle it, and how did you accept it? It's an interesting question. I don't know if there's necessarily anything that I haven't seen, because I've been in Russia before, and I've been in Turkey before, and I think the stands that I were in were like a nice mix between the two. The one thing I just wasn't super used to was maybe how open and friendly the people were, and it's like not a negative thing, but it is a bit of a culture shock. So when I would go sit in restaurants, people would often come up to me and ask me to sit with them. And as an American, that's a very awkward thing. You're not used to having people like invite you to their table, especially when they barely speak English or you barely know them. But I think probably in the 2 months I was there, this happened over 10 times. And you're kind of in a weird situation because I don't speak very good Russian, and I certainly don't speak Kyrgyz or Uzbek. And so you kind of are at a loss of what you can really talk about, and it's a bit awkward. And the men really want to get you drunk, which is also kind of like a funny thing. So sometimes you're like, okay, it's like 2 p.m. Tuesday, and I need to shoot some videos, but I'm really not trying to take shots of vodka with you, but I appreciate it. And so it's hard to kind of navigate that, because you don't want to come off as rude, and you want to make sure that you represent your country, or you want to represent yourself as a foreigner as well as you can. So I think that's maybe the first kind of culture shock. And I don't know. I'm going to come back to that when I get into more detail about Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. So I hope that was. Thanks for asking the question, man. So as I was saying, the history genuinely very interesting in this region, and it's so varied and mixed. And so, you get the Mongol influence, you get the kind of Islamic Enlightenment, and then out of all of that, the Russians just show up in the late 1800s. The Russian Empire was expanding, and these were, within the sphere of influence of the Russian people, and the Russians took it. There's a couple wars. Some of the people in this region had a lot of Russian influence already, so it was easily taken over. And the fact is, this land is pretty sparsely populated, and most people lived nomadically. So I don't imagine it was very challenging for the massive, bloated Russian Empire with one of the world's biggest militaries to take over these people who literally didn't even live in cities, for the most part. So the weird part that goes to the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and then the modern day stands, as we're getting into like modern times, is this weird context of old Turkic culture, of Chinese culture, of Arabic culture and Islam under this kind of umbrella of Russia. And it doesn't make any sense. That's the most puzzling thing for me. It's like you're walking around a place with people who look Chinese, that speak a Turkic language, but you see Russian writing all over the place, and you see communist block housing from the 50s and Soviet Union hammer and sickles. And it just is like this weird mix that's like hard to really explain. And when you're there, it's really weird, I think is the best way to put it. Like, it doesn't feel natural. Like, it feels like it would make more sense if the Ottoman Empire, for example, took over that land, because the Ottomans are like, ancient brothers of the Turkic people who live in that region, or if the Iranians took over that land, because the Iranians are very similar to the Persians and to the Iranians are the Persians, and they're like brothers of the Tajiks, and so they have a lot of influence in that land. But seeing these massive, beautiful Islamic like madrasas, which are Islamic houses of learning, or mosques, under the context of Russia, you're just like, what? How did this happen? Let's see. Popcorn Seller says, have you researched the Khazars and their influence on the region? The Khazars, I don't believe I know that name. It's a very familiar name, but they have a lot of KH ones. So I'm thinking of the Hozerum, which is the one of the Khanates of Khiva. But I definitely should, and I will look into it. So the thing is, with the Central Asian region, there's so many peoples and so many so many like ideologies have been through that area because of the exchange of cultures through the Silk Road. It's very complicated and very complex. So I remember I was with a buddy of mine and we were in Kyrgyzstan, and there's this tower called the Barana Tower, which I have a video if you guys would like to see it. The Barana Tower is basically the last remnant of an ancient Silk Road city. And the tower itself is an old minaret that used to be attached to a mosque that, it fell apart long time ago. And so at the Barana Tower, they have these really old ancient stones that were carved into basically like chieftains that were from, like 700 BCE, really old. But the weirdest thing that you can find, because you have this really ancient peoples thing, you have this Islamic thing from the minaret and the other Islamic tombstones and then writings that you can find, is that you can find Teutonic Knight crosses, which were basically apparently these Mongols or Turkic tribes that converted to Christianity like 1,000 years ago, that were they lived the same nomadic lives, but they were Christians. And so you can find these crosses, and it's just way interesting, because when you imagine, Christendom and the way that it expanded around the world, it wouldn't be unfeasible to imagine it as there are Christians in China and Christians in South Korea, but these like bands of Mongols like 1,000 years ago being Christians, it just is weird. And they were carving in rocks and they're still there. So all the history that's there is just really quite incredible. Okay. Well, someone thinks I'm racist. I don't think I'm racist. I love all races, and I'm trying my best. So tell a story where you ran down the N-word and kept driving. I don't know what that means, but fair enough. You can't please everybody, but I'm trying my best to just describe the world as I can, and I really enjoy all cultures. And if you feel that way, this channel isn't for you, my friend. So, anyways, very interesting, very good mix. So the one thing, I guess, to get into it, okay. So, anyways. All right, this is getting weird, man. This is getting weird. All right, well, we got some trolls on the line. That happens, but it is what it is. So the interesting thing for me is the diversity and ethnic kind of mix of this region. So if you go to like the modern times, and you kind of can go, All right. Well, it is what it is. It's a little bit distracting, but I'm going to get through it, because this is the stuff that happens on YouTube. So we're just gonna go through it. And if you guys are enjoying it so far, stick around and keep listening. We're under a little bit of a attack in the comments. But I'm not sure what it is, but it is what it is. So Central Asia, the diversity is really interesting. And what it is in Kyrgyzstan, you have Kyrgyz people. You also have what they call Hui Chinese, which are kind of like a really interesting mix of Chinese people who had to flee China because they were Muslim during various dynasties, especially in the 18 and early 1900s. So in Eastern Kyrgyzstan, you find a lot of the Hui Chinese, or Dungans as they're called, and their culture is really beautiful. And it's like, if you've never seen a Chinese mosque, it's so unique, because they take the aesthetic of China and then they mix it with the kind of stylistic interpretations of an Islamic mosque. And it's just like this weird mashup that you would never find anywhere else. So you have the Kyrgyz, the Hui Chinese. Those are like the main kind of people you find in Kyrgyzstan. You have the Kazakhs, you have the Uzbeks. And these people are all like kind of, I don't know, like brothers from another mother kind of situation. So they all speak a Turkic language. They all eat very similar food. I would say the more east you go, the more nomadic they are. And the more west you go, the more kind of Silk Road trader they are. So the Uzbeks, the Karakalpaks, They are all, I'm gonna have to turn the comments off. This is really distracting. All right, how do I turn the comments off? All right, what is going on here? Okay, I'm just gonna turn this, this is weird. That's never happened to me on a stream before. Normally people are really nice, but it's just getting weird now. Okay, so essentially the more west you go, the more like Uzbek and the more kind of like Islamic trader you get, and the more east you go, the more nomadic culture you get. When you go south, especially to Turkmenistan and Tajikistan, you get a lot more Tajiks. And Tajiks are people that come from the same tribe as the original Persians, like the Iranians and the various cultures that are there. So what you can find in Uzbekistan specifically are Tajik and Persian buildings. And the style is very different than what the Turkic people were doing. The language is different. The interpretation of the Quran is, I imagine, a little bit different. And overall, where the culture stems from is different. So it's really, really diverse. And so the thing is, in the stands, not so much with Kazakhstan, I guess, but specifically with this valley called the Fergana Valley, which is in the center, basically the center of Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. There's like a huge rift and mess of borders. And this leads to a lot of ethnic conflict. So kind of the story goes, and this is what I've heard, I'm not sure if this is true, that when the Soviet Union was kind of consolidating these kind of Central Asian areas and turning them into SSR states, so Soviet states, Stalin had the idea of making the borders genuinely like kind of confusing on purpose to kind of put Tajiks into Uzbekistan, Uzbeks into Kyrgyzstan, and Kyrgyz into Tajikistan or Uzbekistan. So it's a really big mess. I have this in one of my videos, and you can see the borders. But what this did is it left a lot of people on the wrong side. And when you leave ethnic people on the wrong side of certain borders, it can make the whole thing extremely confusing and can lead to ethnic conflict. So even when I was in Kyrgyzstan, and there's always been scuffles and all this stuff, but the ethnic conflict kind of boiled over when I was there, and apparently I believe it was the Tajiks were hurling rocks at Kyrgyz military, or the other way around, and there was a little bit of a riot, and then some guns were fired, and the two countries sat down, and luckily didn't go to war when I was there. But it can be a problem, and I think this is the one issue with the modern day Central Asian states is that as they came out of the Soviet Union, we know the Soviet Union dissolved in the early 1990s, and they had this kind of ethnic identity to establish like nation states. That nationalism typically comes out of that. So the good news is that all the countries in that region are mostly Islamic, so they can agree mostly on religious basis, but some countries are much more atheist in the long run, especially because of the Soviet presence. And like cities like Bishkek, for example, doesn't have a very strong push for being an Islamic kind of place. Whereas when you go to the Fergana Valley and you go to Uzbekistan, it's extremely conservative Islamic. So it's an interesting kind of like scale, the extreme conservatism to the extreme kind of like, let's say, passive Islamic ideals that you find all over the place. It's not just like that, just in the smaller cities. So I find that generally interesting, and I think it's what makes it so vibrant to travel there. The secondary part that I really enjoy about Central Asia is the nomad culture. And so what I mean by this is that Kyrgyzstan is interesting because they basically have no cities that were built before 1870. So Bishkek is the capital, which was once called Pishpek and also called Frunze. And basically Kyrgyz people were like nomadic horse people. So they lived in yurts. They moved occasionally with their sheep and with their horses and their crops and all this other stuff. They had some agrarian society, but it wasn't that popular. And the majority of stuff that they got over time was, they got from raiding, or they got from trading, or they got from Silk Road related stuff. And so it's just weird because this nomad culture was kind of cut to an end when the Soviets came in, the Russian Empire and the Soviets, and they started building these grand cities. And with the idea of social, with the Soviet society, they started taking these people from the countrysides, moving them into the cities, and then now you get Bishkek, which is like a 1 million person city. The weird part about this is that they still have this nomadic kind of culture within them. And if you get out of Bishkek, the people that are born out of Bishkek are from like very small cities. They still do certain sports that are very nomadic, like kokbaru, which is kind of like horse polo. Polo, it's played on a horse, obviously, but they play it instead with a ball. They use a dead sheep, so it's very strange. Ooh, it seems like the barrage is over, so that's nice. I can get back to you guys. All right, so it says, was there a water source involved in the border skirmish? I recently saw a video, maybe from the Caspian Report, about water wars. So this is actually, if you're still on, this is totally true. The water wars are a huge issue. I don't think that was related to it, but water rights in the area is a huge problem, and specifically in the Fergana Valley, because that's the biggest dense population area in the region. So the issue is that the majority of these countries are either landlocked or have very like thin river systems, or are oases countries, especially like Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. So the access to natural water, especially for these large constructed cities, is like not fantastic. All right, good. Thank you, Mohammed, and thanks for watching this far, man. It's good to have you on. So so yeah, as I was saying, this nomad culture is incredibly interesting and genuinely humble, and you find a lot of people kind of keeping alive this nomadic lifestyle by the foods that they eat and the things that they do. And like one of the biggest tourism things that you can do in Kyrgyzstan, I know, is like, ride horses, or you can watch traditional eagle hunting, where these like big guys with the hats, these traditional kind of Mongol looking characters ride out on horses, and they have eagles, and they send them and have them like kill a rabbit or something. It's really badass. I didn't see it, unfortunately, but I've seen videos of it, and it looks amazing. And this nomad culture is kind of like one of the tourist selling points, and you can stay in like a yurt, which is the traditional kind of house. And it's actually the symbol on this inside of the Kyrgyz flag is a yurt. So these people are really all about that nomad life, and there's something very simple and humble about it, and refreshing to my city dwelling mind. So next up, I would say the hospitality. So I told the story already about the people inviting me to sit with them. The people everywhere were so nice, and were so questioning, and so friendly, and so open, and it made it awesome. Like, best people. And when I was in Uzbekistan, people were so friendly. They wanted to show me things. They had me try food and wouldn't charge for it. It was really an incredible thing. And it's weird because, Turkic culture, and I know this from Turkey, they have a deep sense of hospitality, which is very important and very endearing. But it's something you just don't see in the West. Like in America, we're hospitable, but like we have limits. But it seemed like even when I was paying to stay somewhere, it's like they went above and beyond to provide good service. And I remember staying at this place named Minarai Khurd in Bukhara. And they, I got in, I was tired, it was hot as hell, and they cooked me breakfast right when I got there, and they were so helpful with describing places I should go. And the guy personally drove me to the train station after the end of my stay. And I don't know, this is service. There's like service that you expect, and then there's this. So I think that's a different thing. It's a different thing. That's what I'll say. So hospitality, fantastic. So for this next part, dear peers, how you rate the visited countries? I mean, pros and cons. Is it solely your experience or approval, general knowledge? Another solid question. I don't know. Like, if you're asking about pros and cons, I think that, I made some videos about Bishkek, about living in Kyrgyzstan, but I think there's approved general knowledge, but then there's also like the ways that you see it when you're there. So I think that every place you can read, of course, like what it's like traveling in Kyrgyzstan, and you of course are going to have similar experiences, but you could go to Uzbekistan and get robbed and have a terrible time. So from my personal opinion, like, it was a fantastic place, and there are way more pros than cons, way more pros. But I think if you talk to everyone, maybe the stories might be a bit different. So what is this you say? I've put on a hat for those people listening on the audio podcast. This is a traditional Islamic style kalpak. Kalpak is a type of hat that comes from the Turkic areas. And the Kyrgyz wear these very tall ones. The older men wear some very interesting kalpaks. This one is more of a Uzbek kind of traditional like skull cap that you might see a lot of Islamic men wearing. They have these very unique styles on the side. They're beautifully kind of embroidered. The top, it's a very cool hat. I don't know. I'm very interested in it. And when you wear it, because there's a lot of Russian people, when you wear it, they can see you as like an Islamic brother, and they might be extra nice to you. I always say salam alaikum instead of saying zdravstvuyte to, I don't know, especially when I was in Uzbekistan, and that got me lots of smiles. So I really like the embroidery and the culture of the clothing in this region. It's so cool and so ornate, which is nice. So the last part yeah, look at the short call pat. Yeah, look at that. Yeah, it's you can see these in a lot of different places. They're nice. It's like, I don't buy souvenirs, but this is the one. This is like the one place. The one place I was like, I'm gonna get myself a souvenir. Yeah, this isn't traditionally Islamic, but now it has an Islamic context, I think is the point. So getting into the Islam, this is my opinion from what I saw, is that Uzbekistan versus Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan was much more Islamic than Kyrgyzstan. I think Kyrgyzstan, the Islam has been there for a very long time. I think that the people there have been much more Russified, I think you can say. So they embody the Russian lifestyle more than Uzbekistan. And I think it's because the culture in Kyrgyzstan was more constructed because people didn't live in cities. And in Uzbekistan, these people have been living in cities for 1,000 years. And so it's a lot harder to stamp out traditional culture when it's a city. And it's a lot easier to impose Russian culture when it's like, they're like, hey, horse people, come live in a city. So when you're in Kyrgyzstan specifically, you can see a lot of traditional hats. The kalpaks, these tall kind of hats, they double as Islamic wear. So men should wear hats in Islam in a lot of countries, and they kind of double as that. But they go way back before Islam, and I really think they didn't have much to do with Islam at the beginning. So of course they have mosques, and you can see Turkey is investing money in Kyrgyzstan, like the Turkic brother kind of thing. But it didn't seem, nothing about that country really struck me as that Islamic. I didn't go to the southwest in the Fergana Valley, and I think those people are a little bit more traditional. But I went to the north and the northeast, and the Islam was very much, it was very like generalized, very soft. On the other hand, when I went to Uzbekistan, it was very clear that this was an Islamic country, much more women in hijabs, much more men wearing traditional clothing, traditional hats. I think Tashkent that's the capital, it's a bad example. But when you get out of it, it feels a lot more Islamic. But it just feels like that because I think they have been a lot more Islamic for a long time. There have been mosques built in Bukhara, Samarkand, and other Western cities for literally 500, 700 years. So it kind of is hard for people to erase that quickly. So I think the Kyrgyz, they kind of did Islam on the go. So they didn't really have these, established places to pray, and they probably didn't pray, 5 times a day in a building. It was maybe 5 times a day in the yurt, or 5 times a day out on the farm with the sheep and with the cattle and stuff like that. So if you're looking, and the thing is, all of these countries have a very kind of spiritualistic, kind of pre-Islamic note to them. So I noticed the Islam that I saw in Uzbekistan, it was just felt different than what you'd find in Turkey or what you would see in Lebanon or what you'd see in Egypt with the more Middle Eastern Islamic peoples. It was much more kind of part of the lifestyle as opposed to the forefront of the kind of way that they live their life. Like it seemed like a lot of them live their life as Uzbek and as Islamic, as opposed to some countries where I think it's Islamic first, like in Saudi Arabia, and then they're kind of Saudi. So my own personal opinion. The last part here, I'm going to take the kalpak off because it's very hot in this house because I have to do this without the AC. because it's too loud. So the last part is the Russian influence. And I think, for example, it's totally different in Kyrgyzstan as Uzbekistan. And here's why. They were both, of course, part of the Soviet Union. They were there for like a long period of time. The Russians left a lot of marks, whether it was buildings, infrastructure, language, cuisine, whatever you want to call it. It was really interesting to see the differences. And so what I'll say is that Kyrgyzstan is way more Russian than Uzbekistan. And I think it's because the culture wasn't as deep. Not meaning that Kyrgyz culture isn't really deep and strong, but it's because they didn't build cities. And so it was really easy for the Russians to impose their influence on the way people's lives functioned. And when you're walking around Bishkek, it feels like you're walking around any sort of Russian city. I've only been to the big ones. I haven't been to the small ones. So I even think it would be probably more like a smaller, like Siberian city or something. But you get these really weird mashups. And the best way I can describe this is in the Ashkana or the Stolovaya. A Stolovaya is like this Soviet cafeteria, basically. And you can go in, you can get, you can get some borscht, you can get some kotlet, you can get some puree for like, I don't know, a very affordable price. That was the idea. The Soviets wanted to make things affordable and for everybody. So the Kyrgyz, like they ran with this. So they have all that Russian food and it's there everywhere. But then you can also get manti and plov and different sort of dumplings and different soups that are like Chinese influenced. And it's really cool to see the mishmash because it seemed like in Kyrgyzstan, they didn't want to let go of their culture, but they actually appreciate the Russian kind of culture too. And so it's all together in harmony. And Kyrgyzstan compared to Uzbekistan, since the 90s, Uzbekistan has tried to erase the Russian time. They've taken the language out of Cyrillic. They've changed the city and maybe some of the city names. They've really de-Russified and reinvested in the Uzbek traditions and culture. And I think you can find a lot more Uzbeks that don't speak Russian than do speak Russian these days. Whereas in Kyrgyzstan, it seems like Russian was almost the first language in all the big cities, and then the traditional culture has kind of been pushed out to the small cities. It seems like they're pushing because the nationalism is coming back in Central Asia. It seems like they're pushing for more Kyrgyz in schools, more Kyrgyz culture. But it seems like people are pretty comfortable with the connection with Russia, and a lot of Kyrgyz people go work in Russia. So it seemed like a lot of the people I met there had spent time in Russia, and there's also a notable amount of like Russians, like white Russians that live in Kyrgyzstan, much more noticeable than what I saw in Uzbekistan. So that being said, let's dive into Kyrgyzstan, and I would like to answer another question or read one more thing from my boy Muhammad. He says, cultural traditions overweighs the Islamic traditions in Central Asia, and oppression bans make burden for people follow their religion. Yes, I definitely got that feeling. And yes, I think the Kyrgyz all still hold a positive feeling of the Russians. Like in Turkmenistan, which I think is a million miles away from Russia now, I'm not sure you would get the same vibe. In Tajikistan, it doesn't seem like you'd get the same vibe, but it seems actually, for those of you that don't know, apparently when the Soviet Union was breaking up, Kyrgyzstan was like, please let me be a part of modern day Russia. We'll just be like an autonomous republic. And Russia was like, no, you guys have to figure that one out for yourself. So that's kind of the story. So I'm going to tell you guys a few anecdotes, a few stories about Kyrgyzstan, because that place, I lived there for, I don't know, 5-6 weeks, and it's such a wonderful and splendid place, and I'm very happy to talk about it. So, and if you guys have any questions about Kyrgyzstan or living in Uzbekistan or whatever those questions are, feel free to ask, and of course I will answer them. That's what these times are for. So Kyrgyzstan. So I live in Bishkek, apartment, really good. It's a weird thing, but apparently after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Americans opened a military base outside of Bishkek. So the person that owned my apartment was actually an expatriate American guy in his early 70s who just stayed in Kyrgyzstan after his time living there, and or after his stationing there. He married a Kyrgyz woman and moved out there. And it was funny because there's actually this cafe called Sierra Coffee in the center of Bishkek. They have a few locations. It's like a chain, very Americanized. And yeah, you can find old expats like hanging out, enjoying time, and everyone speaking English. And these guys are all in their 60s. It seemed like the expat community in Kyrgyzstan was actually quite old. It's kind of like what you would see in Vietnam or in Thailand, but without the sex tourism part. So I would almost argue that that's better. So Here's a question. Question number 1. Do you ever want to go back or just keep moving to new places? I have every intention of going back to Central Asia. I have a lot of places on my list. When the borders do open, I will go to Tajikistan and Kazakhstan 100%. I'm super interested, and I might even pop over to Pakistan. So those are on the list. My travel plans for the rest of the year I've been nailing down, but I will be traveling to the Ukraine after Serbia, and then I will be heading to maybe Georgia and Azerbaijan. So I'm going to go back to that region. It's my goal to actually go to every post-Soviet country, minus Turkmenistan, because it's really complicated. Because I'd love to see this. I'm a Russophile, I guess, at this point. So I'm very interested in this stuff. So I will be back for sure. Our next question is, how hard to travel in Corona era and aftermath in Central Asia? It wasn't hard. I was there in June. I'm not in June. I'm sorry. I was there in June and in May and April. The borders, I think, are a little bit tricky. Obviously, I think Kazakhstan closed, Tajikistan isn't open, and Turkmenistan is closed. So you're kind of only left with 2 anyway. I know right when I got out of there, they were closing Uzbekistan. So I think that was kind of, or they weren't closing it, but they were shutting down Tashkent. So I think it just depended on the timing and what the governments were doing. But traveling around the country was fine. You could clearly tell that no one in the country cared what the Corona protocols were. So I don't think it's like a big deal. In Kyrgyzstan, they apparently had some sort of mass protest. They said, we don't want the masks, we're not doing it. And they didn't do it, and they never did it. So it seemed like everything was functioning. They had some weird arbitrary rules, but everything was open when I was there. And it was probably the most normal place I had been up until living here in Serbia. Probably since I had left Vietnam over a year ago, because the Vietnam locked down and there wasn't any particular issues. So when it opens up again, hopefully Kazakhstan will open and I'll go there for sure. Just as an American, it depends on the country because you get certain day regulations in each place. So it really depends. But next, I think it's 30 days in Kazakhstan, 30 days in Uzbekistan, 60 days in Kyrgyzstan, 30 days in Tajikistan, as far as I know. So next question. Where would you live if you must choose one place? So it's an interesting one. I have a low key, got it. So I have like a low key thing. I think from what I've heard, I would move to Almaty, Kazakhstan. Haven't been there, but I had a friend that just went there, and it seems like the perfect combination between Russia, Central Asia, and East Asia. So for me, Uzbekistan was a little bit too Islamic for me, and Tashkent was a little bit too traditional. Bishkek is a wonderful city, and I would certainly go back there. It's so nice. I think Uzbekistan is a good tourism country. I think it would be hard to be there long term because the culture is so strong. And if you don't speak Russian or specifically Uzbek, I feel like you'd feel a bit like a fish out of water. Kyrgyzstan didn't feel like that because there was a lot more expats, and I don't know, it just seemed really accessible. But I think Almaty, Kazakhstan, I've heard just amazing things. Super beautiful, modern, affordable, like it's a good mix. So I think that would be the answer to that question. So let's talk Kyrgyzstan. So Kyrgyzstan, very happy place. Bishkek, really nice spot. Living there in the summer was delightful. The weather was nice. People were very friendly. And the cool part, which I said in my pros and cons of Kyrgyzstan video, was that you can feel like you live there a little bit because they do have this kind of minimal population of Russians and Belarusians and other expats that are from Europe. And so it's the only place where I've ever been in Asia where you kind of just feel like you're part of the squad. Whereas opposed to Uzbekistan, it was very clear I'm not Uzbek. So there are, of course, Russians that live in Uzbekistan, but if you're outside of Tashkent, they're pretty few and far between. There's much more Tajiks and Uzbeks and Karakalpaks and all that other stuff. So Kyrgyzstan was quite interesting in that regard. All right, one more question. As an American, what kinds of lessons or reflections have you had while traveling these stands? What have you learned as example besides communism-friendly people? It's an interesting thing. I don't know. The first one I think just goes with the history and with the mixing of people. It's interesting to see a place with such deep and rich culture, to see a place that has so many various hands put onto it, whether that was in the food, the language, the religion, and the way that people do what they do. It's interesting. So that was the first reflection I had. The second one is like, I don't know why people don't travel to these countries. It's like a second normal reflection because it's such a amazing place to travel. You have like Kyrgyzstan is like the Switzerland of Central Asia. You have beautiful mountains and hikes and high altitude lakes and rivers and really beautiful places. The cities are pretty in Kyrgyzstan because they're mostly built by the Russians, block housing kind of wastelands. But they have some good bones in there, and I really appreciate that style. Actually, it's kind of a thing I enjoy. In Uzbekistan, some of the most fantastic architecture you'll ever see in your life. Majestic, the best. I mean, it's literally the best country I've been to in a long time. Just because the culture is so strong, the architecture is fantastic, the food is unreal, the portion size just delicious, and I don't know. That country is so deep, it's so rich, and I think I learned, what did I learn? I think I learned how, well, first of all, I learned how much I didn't know about the Soviet Union. So I talked about this in my last podcast, or a couple podcasts ago. And I learned how diverse the Soviet Union was, and how the Soviet Union was not what how the Soviet Union was not what we thought it was. I'm gonna drink some water real quick. Give me a second on that question. And for those of you listening and not subscribed to the channel, a subscribe would mean a lot. I would really appreciate it. I'm working very hard on this channel to bring you guys cool and interesting stories from around the world. And that is my mission, trying to be like a young Anthony Bourdain. That's me. So I learned how diverse the Soviet Union was, and also how diverse Asians could be. So when you see like that guy that looks, East Asian, he might be Kyrgyz and you might have no idea about his life experience. So why would you judge him based on preconceived notions? I think the Central Asia was all about breaking down preconceived notions you have about people, because everything there is flipped on its head and not as it seems. And I think that's the cool part about it. So living in Kyrgyzstan was nice. The apartments, pretty good. The cost of living was unbelievable. It was so cheap. You could take a taxi anywhere in Bishkek for like €1. You could eat out for €2 or €3. It's like a couple bucks. I mean, it's really cheap. And the only thing I have to say that was tough about living in Kyrgyzstan was the travel, because it's a very disconnected country. The roads aren't very good. In Bishkek, because it's a very mountainous country, Bishkek isn't really well connected to any of the other big cities. Something like a 12-hour ride to Osh, which is like the second biggest city in the country in the Fergana Valley. And I wasn't willing to do that trip. I was also recovering from some sickness that I got from my sickness in Mexico video, which you guys can see if you want to. And so that was it's a weird place to kind of recover from stuff like that. And it was my first kind of foray into socialized medicine, which was also interesting. It's the first place I've ever seen anyone bribe a doctor. So that was interesting. We don't do that stuff in the West. But yeah, I think I'm gonna write a little short story, a little novel about my time in Central Asia, and especially if I go back, because the way things function is people are looking at stuff differently. Things that are normal for them, you'd be like, what? And things that are normal for you, they're interested in, and they're trying to do, but through their own lens. Like it's like what they do in East Asia or Southeast Asia. They take the Western culture that they find applicable to their lifestyle, and they either put it on steroids and amp it up, which is why like in Thailand and Vietnam, they have so many malls, the biggest malls you could ever see. And they make our malls look so lame, and they've got so much fancy stuff that's like, we came up with it, but they perfected it kind of thing. And in Central Asia, it seems like they're taking some stuff, like the underground bar culture of Bishkek is so cool. They have the coolest little hole in the wall bars and speakeasy bars and stuff like that you just wouldn't expect from a Central Asian nomadic people country. I don't know. Next question. In Central Asia, all people speak Russian and own language, or only their own language. Your videos are amazing. Thank you, Stefano. To answer your question, people normally speak both. Well, okay, we'll say this. People if they are from there, meaning they're not Russian, they're going to speak both languages. If they are only Russian, they will only speak Russian. It's very hard to find Russians that speak any other language in the region. But in Kyrgyzstan, they're going to speak Kyrgyz, they're going to speak Russian, and chances are they're probably going to speak English. This is changing because Russian is becoming less applicable to the peoples there as they're getting greater influence from the United States and Europe, from Turkey. And so some people, instead of thinking like, oh, I need to go move to Moscow to find work, or I need to go move to St. Petersburg, or I need to go move to Belarus or something, because a lot of people obviously do that because it's quite poor. They have invested in learning Turkish and they move to Istanbul, or they've invested in learning English and they have intentions to move to the United States, or they have intentions to move to Western Europe or whatever. I used to teach a Kyrgyz lady and she moved to Ukraine, and then from Ukraine moved to the United States. So there's definitely an exodus of people, and I think people know that language is a big part of it. Kyrgyz is not going to get them anywhere. So even though they're investing a lot heavily in the Kyrgyz language and the Kazakh language and the Uzbek language, they're also teaching English. And I think some countries, especially Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, say, we don't really want to invest in the Russian thing anymore. We're just kind of done with it. And in Kyrgyzstan, they seem to really appreciate the Russian thing. So everyone still speaks Russian. But I went to the countryside in a couple places and I tried to speak Russian. They do not speak Russian. So some people just speak Kyrgyz or just speak Kazakh. It just depends on the relative distance to the city, I think is the main point. So moving on, I would say if you're going to visit anywhere in Kyrgyzstan, you've got to go Issyk-Kul Lake, super beautiful. You can go to hikes in the central region. I didn't do any of it because I was unwell, but I had someplace I'll definitely have to go back to. High altitude lakes, large lakes. Sorry, getting some water again. It's hard to talk for an hour, guys. Podcast it up. Very fresh, very fresh. High altitude lakes, some cultural sites. The one thing that kind of irked me about Kyrgyzstan is that they have no impressive buildings and they have pretty much no cultural heritage sites that were built before 1850. So the Barana Tower, I mentioned earlier, is like 500 years old or something. They have a place called Tash Rabat, which is an old caravanserai, which is like a place where Silk Road traders would stop and, feed their camels and their horses and then keep going in the south part of the city and in the south part of the country. And that is like legitimately the whole country. Shocking. But it's because they were horse people. They just didn't build stuff. And I can't blame them. So I would say Kyrgyzstan is an amazing country. As a wrap up, it's definitely a place you have to see. It's a complex place and a place to go in with a really open mind, and hopefully it will leave a really strong impression on you as a person and as a traveler. And that's why I take my hats off and say Spasiba Bolshoy, Rahmat to Kyrgyzstan. It's a place I very much enjoyed. So let's see. All right, we're going to move on to Uzbekistan now. And I'm going to keep the hat on because it makes me feel very Uzbek. So Uzbekistan was a trip. It's a place, it was on my list of top 10 places I wanted to visit. It was number 1. The reason for that is it's not very well touristed. It's Silk Road. It's Islamic architecture. It's nomad horse culture and really epic Asian empires. And because who the hell ever goes to Uzbekistan? So I showed up. I had this kind of 15-day plan. So I wanted to start in Tashkent, and then I went to the north to a city called Nukus, which is the capital of an autonomous region called Karakalpakstan, which is basically it would have been a Soviet Socialist Republic, but they just didn't have the population and the economic prowess, so they incorporated it into Uzbekistan. The people are very similar to Uzbeks. They speak a different language. They have their own culture. They have their own president. They have their own basically everything, but it is a part of Uzbekistan. So if you want to see something that's unique, I made one of my longer form videos over 3 days in Karakalpakstan. I went to a place where Bald and Bankrupt went. He kind of made that place kind of famous. So I was like the 3rd or 4th YouTuber to make a video there that I saw. And it's a really special place. It's unbelievable. I mean, the stuff you see is just mind blowing. And the people there are so nice. And it feels it's very close to Turkmenistan. So you get this kind of weird Turkmen vibe. It's different. It doesn't feel exactly like Uzbekistan. Also because they're ancient cities, they don't really have them because they were also nomadic people. And so You're seeing like the context of people without cities build cities in the way that they want to, and that's a really important and really cool thing, I do have to say. And so, Karakalpakstan, it means the black hat people. So a lot of the traditional people were wearing these black kalpaks, just like this, with red kind of loopy stuff. And yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting to see Uzbekistan from a different lens. And it's like in the desert, man. You're like out there. You're like really out in the desert. And the best thing I did maybe was also go see the old Aral Sea ruins. For those of you that don't know, the Aral Sea used to be one of the largest seas in the world. I think top 10 probably. And basically the Russians decided in the 70s that it would be an amazing idea to grow cotton in Uzbekistan, which is a natural desert country. And so to water these cotton fields, the Russians decided the Aral Sea, and it's not necessarily, the sea isn't salt water, so they couldn't do anything with it. But the tributary rivers that flow into the Aral Sea, which make sure it doesn't, dry up because it's in a desert, they decided to irrigate used on that. And there was something like every year the Aral Sea got, X, like literally, like let's say 100,000 liters of water. Let's just say 100,000 liters. That's not very much for a lake, but after the Russians were done, like they got 10 liters of water. They basically restricted the flow of water to the Aral Sea so much that the sea over the subsequent like 30, 40 years basically went from the fourth largest to basically like two small lakes that barely count as a sea. And unfortunately, the people of Karakalpakstan, which were these nomadic people that lived and thrived as fishermen and people that used this lake, now the majority of them will never see the sea that fed their forefathers for thousands of years. And that's a little bit heartbreaking, I think. And it's one of those, the Russians have three huge mess ups as far as like environmental impact. One is the Aral Sea, one is Chernobyl, and the other one is Derveza, which is in Turkmenistan. And I'm sure there's more than that. I've watched the video about Chelyabinsk, and that city's pretty messed up too. But the Soviets definitely did some interesting things, but the Karakalpak, I cannot imagine they respect the Russians that much for doing that to them. So interesting place. Next, you basically go from Tashkent, and then you go all the way to the northwest to Karakalpakstan, and then you can make a loop through basically, Uzbekistan is basically a desert, and then you dump it, there's like 5 oases that people have built cities in. So the next I went to the Khanate of Hozarum, which of course doesn't exist anymore, but was an old Khanate that fostered this amazing city called Khiva, which is near a larger city called Urgunch, which I would not go to Urgunch. There's nothing particularly there. But Khiva is this unbelievable gem of a city. It's like walking back into time 1,000 years, and you see this city rise up the desert with the colors, the turquoise, and the madrasas, and everything's built with mud and clay. And so it looks like something like there's that Star Wars where they're like, they're in the pub and they're all playing that dun 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 dun. It's like that. It's so unique and so cultural and so Islamic and so awesome. Like you're walking around, you're like the first couple minutes, you're literally in awe. The first couple hours, you're still in awe. And when the sun goes down and they light up the mosques and the madrasas, it's just unbelievable. Just unbelievable. If you travel to Albania, then Turkmenistan is old, good times like in Albania. Yeah, I mean, I'm in for Turkmenistan, man. I'm in. Yeah, and so Khiva is just, put on a list. That's like a top city I've ever seen, because also I was there when it wasn't super touristy, and they had this festival, this young person festival, and it was just the Yoshlar Fest. It was just incredible. The city, it's just weird walking to these madrasas that are just built in the middle of the desert for these Silk Road kings, and you're just sitting in one, just being pensive and thinking about things. It was a great place to turn off your phone and just listen to the sounds of the desert and walk around and smell the grilling meat, and just great. So from there, I went to Bukhara, which is like Khiva on steroids. Bukhara is an ancient Silk Road city. It was the center of a lot of Silk Road trade, and so they built these huge mosques and madrasas, and Islamic learning facilities and markets, and it's everything that you want traveling in the Middle East to be, but it's in a culture that's a lot more open. And so I know traveling in the Arabic world, sometimes people's complaint is that the people are pretty aggressive, and it can be, as a tourist, sometimes a little bit intimidating. But traveling in Uzbekistan, people are so open and so welcoming and so friendly and smiling and holding your hand, trying to pull you into places. And I don't know, nicest people ever. And Bukhara was so impressive. The one thing that I can't understate about Bukhara was the weather. It was so freaking hot in Bukhara when I was there. It was like 110 degrees. It's really not a joke. I thought I could walk around in 110, but it was really rough. The next city I went to was Samarkand. Samarkand, it's an interesting city as well because it's mostly Tajik, and so a lot of the influences you can see there as far as the architecture, it reminds you much more of what you would what I've seen in pictures of Iran and Persia and all those kind of empires. It was the ancient home of the Timurid Empire, which was led by kind of the last horse lord guy of Central Asia, Amur Timur, and like just so epic. If it's weird because I don't know what UNESCO does for picking their sites, like their world wonders, but the Registan is this massive complex of 3 madrasas and a mosque in the center of the old city of Samarkand. And this is the most impressive city, or the most impressive site I've ever seen. It's the most ornate building I've ever seen. The scale of it is enormous. The attention to detail, the Islamic writings on it, I mean, it's phenomenal. And the weird part is like, I've been to Chichen Itza, I've been to the Colosseum. Those are great. I'm not going to say the Colosseum is bad. I'm not going to say Chichen Itza is bad, but this was better. Like for me, objectively better, cooler. I mean, not nearly as old as the Colosseum, but goddamn impressive. Like really, really impressive. And Chichen Itza is impressive. I went to that this year too. I've been to 2 World Wonders this year, but damn, that really shook me up. All right, moving on to the next question. Stefano asks, do you prefer East Europe or Central Asia? Justify your answer. Really interesting live. Thanks for watching, man. That's a good question. I would prefer Central Asia, and here's why. Because I'm a lover of Turkey, and I'm a lover of complex cultures. I would say that Central Asia packs a bigger punch, meaning it gives you more for your time. Eastern Europe, like the Balkans, for example, is super cool. Serbia is great. Bosnia is great. All these places are great. But because their proximity so close to the great European empires, and because they were part of them, and because a lot of the culture still flows through them, like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Hungarian Empire, everyone's been down here, the Ottoman Empire. These places have a little bit less to offer, at least as far as culture goes. I think they're like Serbian culture. I'm going to do a whole podcast about this later in the week, I think, but Serbian culture is really interesting, really proud, really strong, but it's very like, for me, it's very like what they appreciate. It's very simple, and it's very understandable. I'll say that it's very European and very close to what I come from because I'm from the United States, right? So Central Asia, it's like mystical and old and different and older than the Ottomans. It's like it's the original. It's the place where all that culture came from. So it's like it's deep. And it's so deep that you have to really like take a few minutes to even understand what's going on. Like as a Western person, even if you said you're from Argentina, as an Argentinian going to the Balkans, of course it would be different, but you grow up in the context of Italian, Spanish culture in Argentina. So what you see in Albania, I mean, it's different, but it's not that different because the Albanians have adopted a lot of things from Italy. And so have you guys. So I think there's that. Russia was cool but the thing that made it so vibrant was actually all the Central Asians that were there, and it was like all the why is the street food like this, or also the people from the Caucasus, the Georgians, the Dagestanis, the Chechens, the Armenians, those people that really give Russia flavor. Other than that, Russia is very similar to Poland or very similar to Norway. They're different, but they're not as vibrant. So that's what I'll say. I think Ukraine is an interesting thing because Ukraine used to have, in the Crimea, they had Khanates and Tatars and people, the original Cossacks. They used to dress up very similarly to the Ottomans and to these Turkic people, because that's where they came from. And the Russian culture just kind of overtook that. So when I go to Ukraine, I hope to kind of uncover the secrets and history of Ukraine. But I think the context of it today is very much Russified. Or we can call it Slavified. Let's call it that. That's probably a better term. So where was I? So Samarkand, super beautiful. Oh, I'm going to get one more question for you. And nightlife, parties are good in Central Asia. Bishkek is ripping. I mean, Bishkek has some awesome nightlife, like very impressive. Clubs were really fun. The people were so fun to go out with. There's this place in downtown Bishkek called, what's it called? München Pub, like Munich bar, Munich pub. And like the music's loud. The people are good. It's like, what I love about Kyrgyzstan is like everything about it screamed East Asia, because the Asians like really know how to party. Like Asians like Vietnam, China, Japan, like Korea, these people party so hard. And you find that the similar kind of thing in Bishkek. The bars are great. The beers are cheap. People are nice. The women are beautiful, really beautiful women, and really friendly people. So it's nice. Uzbekistan, I don't think it's a good party place. It's much more traditional. You'd be hard pressed to find anything besides a bar in any city except Tashkent. And in Tashkent, I would say, I don't know. I I didn't party in Tashkent at all. So I'm not really one to say. They have cool bars in Tashkent, but I think because it's the more traditional culture and much more Turkic Islamic culture, you're probably not going to find the nightlife that you would in Bishkek. I know Almaty also has amazing nightlife from what I've heard. I assume Dushanbe in Tajikistan, probably not. So I just think the more west you go, the closer you get to Iran, the less fun the nightlife is. The closer you get to China and to Russia, probably the more fun you're going to have. I would say that's the idea for you. So the last stop on our journey in Uzbekistan was Tashkent. It's a really cool city. It's modern. It's vibrant. They really removed a lot of the Russian stuff, and so it doesn't feel nearly as, well, I guess as Soviet as Bishkek feels. But one thing I will also say is it doesn't nearly feel as poor as Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan felt very poor, not in a bad way, in a little bit of a dusty way, but especially when you get out of the capital, it's like you can really feel that people don't have any money. Like you can see it, and because a lot of the industries dried up after the Soviets left. It was tough. And so in Uzbekistan, they have a better tourism industry. They always had better industries. They have better places to farm. They can trade more. They have better relations with some countries in the region. So it kind of makes sense that they would be a little bit better off. And the countryside of Uzbekistan was a lot richer, or it didn't feel nearly as poor as Kyrgyzstan. It was like an interesting thing, which actually surprised me because I thought Uzbekistan was going to be very similar. And when I was driving through these small towns, it seemed like the Uzbeks had a lot more, and the buildings were a lot nicer. All right, next question. Why do you think Central Asian countries are closed, afraid of tourists? Less known, bad tourism infrastructure, or else? That's a good question. I think the first part goes back to the Soviet Union connection. I think all of the Soviet countries were tourist averse until the early 2000s. It's like you didn't see people traveling to Russia in the 90s because it was ruled by warlords and oligarchs and bandits. And you didn't see tourism really explode in the Baltic states until they kind of incorporated into Europe. I think this is all pretty new. So I don't think they necessarily were averse to it. I don't know if that's the right word. I just think that they were trying to figure it out. And when you have 70 years of Soviet censorship of information and oppression, not that everything the Soviets did was bad. It just doesn't lead your country to being very open. Apparently, Uzbekistan opened quite late compared to the rest of them. And obviously, Turkmenistan isn't open. So that could be, you're kind of in the land of weird dictators too. So, I mean, I know Turkmenistan has the Gurbanguly, I don't remember his last name, but yeah, he's like one of the most wild dictators that is in the world. And I think in Kyrgyzstan, they don't have much better. Let's see what his name is. Okay, Meet the Stands. Yeah, I think the thing is, like each place was kind of isolated, and it's a very isolated region, even though it's on the connection of the Silk Road. It's very far from China, so you can think of that as like a big line in the sand. Like the Kyrgyz and the Chinese even have a buffer zone that no one can even go to without a permit. So think of that as like off limits. Russia is now kind of like off limits. Like, and so you're left in this pocket of the stands, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. So you're kind of in this region that's surrounded by censorship of information and a lot of what in the West we would consider bad actors as far as political entities, Russia, Iran, Pakistan. So I just think people are hesitant to go there because it doesn't sound good. But the thing is, you're not going to Iran, you're not going to Russia, you're not going to Pakistan, you're going to Kyrgyzstan. And I think the thing is, the marketing isn't there. The people don't know. People aren't aware that these countries even exist. They're not aware of the differences, and they're not aware of who they are. And so I think some countries have been doing a better job. I know what was it? Kazakhstan did a really funny like Borat kind of marketing campaign, and I know Kyrgyzstan's been doing good marketing campaigns. It's just about getting the word out because now people are starting to know because people are starting to go. The secondary part is it's expensive to go to. It's disconnected and the infrastructure is not great. So I know they do tours, and I know like a lot of people will go there on tours, but or being a solo backpacker, like crazy guy like me. But it's kind of hard to say like I'm going to be from the United States. I'm going to pay for literally a flight to the opposite side of the world to go to Uzbekistan, where like they don't have a great tourist infrastructure. I don't know about that. And then also from Europe, I mean, it's not the cheapest place to go to. So, I mean, I flew from, where did I fly from? From Skopje. And I paid 280 euros one way, which is like 320 bucks. So I just think it's kind of like where it is. I think Chinese tourists will start to go, but some of those countries don't have the best relationship with China. I know a lot of Russians do go. So I think it just depends, guys. I think it really just depends. So my last little note will be on Uzbekistan. The capital city was really nice. If you go to Uzbekistan, you gotta get some plov. It was a lot richer. It was a lot richer than Kyrgyzstan for sure. And I think that's a nice way to end it. I think, do they embrace or reject their Soviet connection? I talked about this a little earlier. Kyrgyzstan embraces it. Uzbekistan rejects it. Kazakhstan rejects it. Tajikistan, I think, rejects it. So these places are all de-Russifying, and they're moving away from their Russian past. And Kyrgyzstan is the only one, as I said earlier, they wanted to actually stay as a part of the Soviet Union, not the Soviet Union, but stay as a part of Russia, as an autonomous province of Russia, as opposed to being its own country. So I think that because Russia constructed that country, like literally from the ground up, I think they have a lot more ties to Russia than Uzbekistan did, because they invaded Uzbekistan, they took over their beautiful cities, they stole their religion from them, and then they left. And then the Uzbeks were like, good. Whereas I think the Kyrgyz were like, but you made us Russians and now you're leaving us. That was the impression that I got. So all right, guys, do you have? I'm gonna leave it. Is there any more questions from the people watching? You guys have been so cool with the questions. This has been great. This has been like my favorite live stream so far, minus the shenanigans that happened before. If you guys have any more questions, type them in now. If you guys aren't subscribed to the channel yet, definitely hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. We've got like 3 or 4 more videos coming from Serbia. Then we're heading to Ukraine, and then maybe to the Caucasus. So we will definitely see. So I think that's going to do it. If you have a chance to go to Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan this summer, I would definitely recommend it. Safe countries, nice countries. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a good night, everybody. And we will see you on the next live stream. I'm probably going to do one later this week, so stay tuned and I'll be there. Fala, that's for Serbian. I was trying to say Rahmat, Uzbek, Spasiba Bolshoi, Russian, and Živeli. Cheers from Belgrade. See you guys next time.